So Ramanujan does this really interesting thing. He kind of asks us to look at this image of the Earth that was taken from Apollo 17, you know, for its successful trip to the moon. And it's become like an iconic sort of image now in our kind of cultural history, where we sort of like see the planet for the first time, like as this one thing, this unus mundus, you know, very much along the lines of the way that the Platonists saw the cosmos as being or the universe rather, this kind of this round and complete thing that's ensouled. And he says, does this image of Earth as seen from space evoke a sense of ultimate alienation from the Earth, a kind of triumphant farewell to nature that celebrates the power of the disembodied human mind to take leave of its senses in a departure from the Earth? So in other words, this kind of transcendent tendencies we have, we want to kind of escape, or we want to be overly sort of intellectual about stuff. So he goes on and he says, is it a triumph of the will that celebrates our capacity to break the natal bonds of gravity that have tied us to the Earth? In other words, to become like a space-faring civilization. Is it an image of our final farewell as we gather the technological power to depart the Earth, and perhaps in light of how we have managed to despoil it and even to wire it for destruction, a leave-taking that is motivated by a felt sense of necessity? So in other words, you know, we've destroyed the planet, we've kind of destroyed the climate, and now, you know, we won't sort of like try and fix it, we'll just sort of bugger off somewhere else. So that's the kind of the Neptune escapism that I was talking about sort of earlier. Or on the other hand, does it evoke a sense of wonder that celebrates for the first time some dim, even archaic remembrance of Earth as home to all of us, and one that invites return? Does it awaken another bond alongside that of gravity, a bond that tugs on the human soul, a bond of desire, of eros, rooted in the aesthetic longing of the human heart for home? Is it an image that evokes a sense of homecoming? So he says, you know, it's good to sort of hold those two thoughts, because those kind of really represent the two like tendencies within us to sort of like, you know, either sort of over intellectualize and escape from the kind of emotional reality of the situation on the one hand, and then on the other hand to acknowledge perhaps our separation on the other, which is maybe a more mature response, a more kind of Saturnian response, and then to acknowledge how alienated that makes us feel, and then, you know, perhaps as we're kind of acknowledging that sense of separation, it sort of evokes in us the opposite quality of wanting to go home, you know, of return, that kind of thing. I think it's an interesting exercise. And he, you know, I think he, in that sense, he's sort of tapping into our kind of human, you know, the thing that transcends all cultures, nationalities, etc., and seeing us on, you know, all of us on a very human level as being part of this planet Earth. You know, we're all from planet Earth, we're all Earthlings. And it is a very powerful exercise. But then what he says is so interesting, and this is, I think, where the inversion comes in. He says, you know, if we shift the image and we think in exile, so in other words, we acknowledge our sort of exile, much like Saturn, you know, was exiled after he, you know, ate his own children, and became a tyrant. So by acknowledging our feeling of alienation or exile, it awakens in us the orphan. And who better than the homeless orphan to experience the desire to find a way home? And I couldn't help but use this image of Oliver Twist, you know, who's really sort of the archetypal original orphan in the kind of Western mind. It's an interesting one. It's a sort of a really interesting one. This is where I think inversion really kind of comes into play, where we can almost be reborn, or we can re-envisage our situation in that we might feel terrible about where we find ourselves right now, but then will that spur us into action to try and remedy the situation, or will we just sit in sort of like self-pity and kind of like fear and alienation and just kind of let things die away? So the way that Ramanujan sort of expresses this is slightly different, but I think nonetheless, you know, equally valid. So he says the image of the round dance, it underlines the necessity of holding the two things together. So in other words, the desire for transcendence or escape on the one hand, and then the desire to return, to sort of go down. So this up and down movement. So neither splitting them in terms of either or, nor judging one to be superior to the other. Indeed, the danger lies in breaking the embrace of the dance, for then thinking in exile becomes a way of taking leave of our senses in some final farewell to that natal bond between embodied life and nature, in other words, death. While thinking in place, you know, so in other words, sitting down under the tree, becomes a romantic longing for some Edenic world before the fall into technology. So yes, this sort of utopian ideal of the Garden of Eden. You know, that we can't entirely escape technology, and we probably wouldn't want to in a lot of ways because of the many ways that it can improve modern life. So he says, in this romantic fantasy, we forget that in the distance from home, so characteristic of thinking in exile, the awareness of home is already present as a seed. So, you know, it's like that yin-yang sort of symbol that's so, you know, famous, is that within the black there is the kernel of this little seed of the white, and from this can come the reversal, you know, so from the blackness can come the whiteness, and vice versa. And this is so much about the inversion that we talk about in initiation.